Nazi Germany was the setting for one of humanity's darkest eras, a regime marked by brutality and absolute control. However, amidst this chaos, science and technology reached levels of innovation never seen before, driven by an ideology that knew no ethical limits. In the laboratories and factories of the Third Reich, colossal tanks such as the Tiger II were designed, revolutionary rockets like the V-2 were developed, and mass manipulation technologies emerged that changed the course of the war. But these advances were accompanied by unimaginable horrors, atrocious medical experiments in concentration camps, and secret projects that still generate conspiracy theories today, such as Die Glocke and the Haunebu crafts. How did such a technologically advanced nation use science to serve a machinery of death? What secrets do their innovations still conceal? Were the Germans truly so far ahead compared to their enemies? What do the secret Nazi archives reveal? Science in the service of the Third Reich, the ideology behind the advances. Nazi Germany in its time made giant strides not only in military and political control, but also in intellectual and scientific domination. Science, under the Third Reich's regime, became a strategic weapon to consolidate power and justify an ideology based on racial supremacy and territorial expansion. We will explore how scientific and technological advances were shaped by Nazi principles and how scientists, in their eagerness to contribute to the regime, became accomplices to atrocious crimes. Since Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933, science was reorganized to align with the Nazi Party's objectives. Institutions such as the Reich Science Office were established to oversee research in various disciplines, from genetics to nuclear physics. Funding for scientific projects increased significantly, but with one condition: they had to serve the interests of the Third Reich. A little-known curiosity is the so-called Reich Scientists' Manifesto, a document from 1934 in which more than 1,000 German academics swore loyalty to the regime. This manifesto laid the groundwork for a system in which science ceased to be neutral, becoming a tool of oppression and control. Nazi ideology found in science a means to justify its eugenic policies and racial supremacy. Genetics and anthropology were manipulated to support theories of racial purity. Scientists such as Eugen Fischer and Ottmar von Verschuer conducted research that proved the inferiority of certain ethnic groups, particularly Jews and Romani people. In 1935, the Nuremberg laws formalized these ideas, prohibiting interracial marriages and promoting the forced sterilization of individuals considered genetically defective. Declassified archives from 2005 reveal that more than 400,000 people were sterilized under this program, based on scientific research that lacked ethical or rigorous foundations. A chilling testimony comes from one victim of these programs, Anna R., who years later recounted, "I was taken to a clinic without knowing why. When I left, I could no longer have children. They said it was for the good of the nation, but they destroyed my life." Many prominent scientists actively collaborated with the regime, motivated by nationalism, ambition, or fear. Among them was Werner Heisenberg, one of the fathers of quantum physics who worked on Germany's nuclear program. Although his level of commitment to Nazism remains debated, his research laid the foundations for the development of military technologies. Another emblematic case is that of Fritz Haber, a chemist whose invention of Zyklon B gas, originally designed as a pesticide, was later adapted for use in gas chambers. Although Haber died in 1934, his scientific legacy was instrumentalized by the regime to carry out genocide. Declassified documents from 1997 also revealed that a group of scientists from the Kaiser Wilhelm Society participated in medical experiments in concentration camps, using prisoners as test subjects for genetic and pharmacological research. The Third Reich's obsession with technological innovation was particularly evident in the military field. German scientists developed advanced weapons that changed the dynamics of war, from Tiger tanks to V-2 rockets. A lesser-known but equally ambitious project was that of the Type 21 U-boats, which represented a revolutionary advancement in submarine technology. These submarines, designed for prolonged missions, incorporated innovations that would influence post-war submarine design. A secret archive declassified in 2010 revealed that the regime also explored more speculative technologies, such as particle beams and sonic cannons. Although many of these projects never advanced beyond the experimental stage, they demonstrate how science was instrumentalized in the pursuit of increasingly destructive weapons. One of the most intriguing aspects of Nazi science was its interest in theoretical physics and its relationship with the nuclear program. Although the Nazis never managed to develop an atomic bomb, historical documents show that they were more advanced than initially believed. A recent finding in the archives of the University of Göttingen reveals that a team of physicists, led by Kurt Diebner, worked on an experimental nuclear reactor in 1944. Although the project failed due to technical problems and lack of materials, this effort highlights the regime's ambition to dominate atomic energy. Later, after the fall of the Third Reich, the instrumentalization of science under Nazism left a deeply controversial legacy. Many of the scientists who had collaborated with the regime were recruited by the Allies through programs such as Operation Paperclip, taking their knowledge to the United States and the Soviet Union. This transfer of talent sparked an ethical debate that persists to this day. Can scientific progress justify the use of knowledge obtained through crimes against humanity? The contributions of these scientists to space exploration and the development of modern weapons are undeniable, but their legacy is inextricably linked to one of the darkest chapters in history. What secrets were kept, and what technologies never saw the light of day? It is time to delve into each of the German technologies and scientific advancements. The steel colossi, revolutionary tanks and weapons of war. The Third Reich invested colossal resources in developing weapons that reflected its ambition for global dominance. Among these, tanks played a crucial role. German military technology, driven by advanced engineering and an unprecedented strategic vision, produced armored vehicles that not only redefined modern warfare, but also symbolized the regime's attempt to impose its power on all fronts. However, behind these steel colossi lay logistical challenges, questionable decisions, and projects so ambitious they seemed straight out of a science fiction novel. At the beginning of World War II, the Germans had already demonstrated the effectiveness of their Panzer tanks in the campaigns of Poland and France. However, the arrival of more resilient Allied tanks, such as the Soviet T-34, forced the Third Reich to redouble its efforts in producing superior vehicles. This was when the legendary Tiger I and Tiger II emerged, two of the most iconic tanks of the conflict. The Tiger I, introduced in 1942, represented a revolution in military technology. With its thick armor and 88mm cannon, it could destroy targets at long distances with devastating precision. But at over 50 tons, it also posed a logistical challenge. On the Russian steppes, the Tiger I got stuck in the mud, and its high fuel consumption became an unsustainable problem as the conflict progressed. The Tiger II, known as Königstiger or King Tiger, was a response to these limitations. Introduced in 1944, it combined even more armor and firepower. However, its weight of over 70 tons made it vulnerable to similar problems. Declassified documents after the war revealed that more than 50% of the lost Tiger IIs were not destroyed by the enemy, but abandoned due to mechanical failures or lack of fuel. Despite this, Allied soldiers expressed cautious respect for these tanks. An American commander, interviewed in 1945, commented, "When you heard the roar of a tiger, you knew you were in trouble. You could hide or pray, but facing it head-on was almost suicidal." However, the Third Reich was not satisfied with these vehicles. As the war became more desperate, even more ambitious projects were conceived. One of them was the Maus, a tank that took the concept of heavy armor to the extreme. Designed by Ferdinand Porsche, the Maus weighed over 180 tons, making it the heaviest tank ever built. Equipped with a 128mm cannon, it had the theoretical capability to destroy any Allied target. However, only 2 prototypes were produced due to enormous logistical challenges. Tests conducted in 1944 revealed that the mouse was practically unmanageable in real combat. Its limited mobility, combined with the impossibility of crossing most bridges, made it an impractical giant. One of the prototypes, captured by Soviet forces, is currently housed in the Kubinka Military Museum, serving as a reminder of the Nazi regime's excessive ambitions. But if the mouse seemed colossal, the Landkreuz P-1000 Rata, conceived as a supertank, was even more excessive. This project, envisioned by the German Ministry of Armament in 1942, proposed a 1,000-ton vehicle equipped with two 80-centimeter naval cannons. According to blueprints found in German archives after the war, the Rat would have had a crew of over 40 people and an engine as powerful as that of a warship. Although it never moved beyond the design stage, this project illustrates the megalomaniacal approach of the Third Reich in its final years. Experts agree that even if it had been built, the Rata would have been an easy target due to its size and lack of mobility. The impact of these tanks on the battlefield was notable, but it also revealed the limitations of the German approach. While the Tiger I and II proved effective in specific situations, their production was slow and costly. For every Tiger manufactured, the Allies could produce multiple medium tanks, such as the American Sherman or the Soviet T-34, giving them a decisive numerical advantage. This disparity was evident in the Battle of Kursk in 1943, where the Germans deployed their most advanced Tigers and Panzers but failed to overcome the overwhelming number of Soviet armored units. The testimonies of German soldiers who operated these tanks offer a unique perspective on their impact. Heinz Guderian, a German general known as the father of the Panzers, wrote in his memoirs that the Tiger and King Tiger were impressive weapons, but too expensive, too slow, and too scarce to win the war. This analysis, corroborated by strategic documents from the German High Command, underscores how the regime's obsession with technical perfection often hindered its ability to respond to the practical demands of the conflict. Additionally, declassified war archives reveal that many of these projects were financed by diverting resources from other essential areas, such as aircraft and artillery production. The insistence on building machines like the Maus or the Rata, despite their obvious limitations, reflects not only the regime's ambition, but also its disconnect from the realities of the conflict. As the war progressed and resources dwindled, these projects became symbols of the Third Reich's decline rather than effective tools of war. The narrative of German tanks would not be complete without mentioning the psychological effect they had on the Allies. Units that faced the Tiger and King Tiger remembered the fear they inspired, but also learned how to counter them. British documents from 1944 detail how soldiers began using flanking tactics and air coordination to neutralize these threats. A British commander commented, "We didn't engage them head-on, that was madness. But once you knew how to exploit them, they weren't invincible." Through these steel colossi, the Third Reich sought to impose its dominance on the battlefield, but technical, logistical, and strategic limitations ultimately doomed them. Though they remain symbols of German ingenuity and ambition, they also revealed the profound contradictions of a regime that prioritized grandeur over efficiency. These tanks, with their achievements and failures, became witnesses to an era where technology was at the service of the most destructive war in history. Medical experimentation, the horrors in the name of science. The medical experimentation carried out in Nazi concentration camps was one of the most atrocious aspects of the Third Reich regime. Under the pretext of advancing science and strengthening the Reich, Nazi doctors perpetrated inhuman crimes that left indelible scars on the history of humanity. These experiments, performed on defenseless prisoners, not only represented a violation of the most basic ethical principles, but also revealed how far science could go when detached from morality. In camps such as Auschwitz, Dachau, and Ravensbrück, prisoners were selected for tests that often led to death or left irreparable physical and psychological consequences. Auschwitz, overseen by figures like Josef Mengele, became synonymous with medical horror. Mengele, known as the Angel of Death, used prisoners, especially children, as test subjects. His obsession with twins led him to perform cruel procedures that included injecting chemical substances into their eyes to change their color, or unnecessary amputations to study regeneration. A testimony from Eva Moses Kor, a survivor of these experiments, described how Mengele supervised the tests with an unsettling coldness. He treated us as if we were laboratory objects. We were not children. We were numbers in his experiments. In addition to Mengele, other doctors played prominent roles in these crimes. In Ravensbrück, experiments were conducted to test the effectiveness of medications and treatments against infections. Female prisoners were deliberately wounded and exposed to lethal bacteria, such as streptococcus, to observe the progression of the disease. Many died as a result of these tests, while others were left mutilated. Declassified documents in 1996 revealed that the doctors involved justified their actions by arguing that they were contributing to the advancement of war medicine, an excuse devoid of ethical foundation. Medical experiments were not limited to diseases. In Dachau, Nazi doctors investigated the effects of extreme cold, subjecting prisoners to severe climatic conditions to study hypothermia. Reports indicate that victims were submerged in freezing water or exposed to the open air for hours while doctors meticulously recorded their agony. An anonymous survivor recounted how his companions were used as mere tools. They let them die while taking notes. There was no humanity in them, only data. Curiously, one of the lesser-known but equally terrifying projects was the study of mass sterilization conducted on Jewish and Romani prisoners. Reich doctors sought efficient methods to sterilize large populations using radiation and forced surgical procedures. Archives discovered in 1983 detail how these tests caused indescribable suffering, leaving victims gravely injured or incapable of leading a normal life. These initiatives, backed by the regime's eugenic ideology, reflect the complete dehumanization of victims under Nazi control. The effects of these experiments extended far beyond the end of the war. During the Nuremberg trials, Nazi medical crimes were a central issue, and several doctors, including Karl Brandt, Hitler's personal physician, were convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The evidence presented at these trials included testimonies from survivors, medical documents, and photographs that left the world horrified. A fragment of the trial records details how a witness described the aftermath of the experiments. They walked like specters, with damaged bodies and broken souls. There was no way to comprehend how someone could do that to them. Although the perpetrators were brought to justice, the ethical implications of their crimes continued to resonate in the medical community. Some results from the experiments, although obtained inhumanely, contained valuable information about the human body. This posed an ethical dilemma. Should this knowledge be used? In 1950, the international scientific community established the Nuremberg Code, a set of principles aimed at ensuring that medical experimentation respected the rights and dignity of participants. This code remains a pillar of modern medical ethics. However, not all perpetrators faced justice. Josef Mengele, the principal architect of the experiments in Auschwitz, managed to escape after the war and lived in South America under false identities until his death in 1979. For decades, his figure became a symbol of evil without punishment, and his legacy of horror remains the subject of investigations and documentaries. In 1992, Mengele's personal archives were discovered, containing detailed notes on his experiments. These documents revealed the meticulousness with which he recorded his victims' suffering, offering a chilling insight into his mentality. The impact of these medical crimes is not limited to the historical realm. They have profoundly influenced the way medical research is regulated today. Modern clinical trials, ethics committees, and international laws to protect participants in scientific studies are, in part, direct responses to the atrocities committed by Nazi doctors. Nazi medical experimentation left an indelible mark on the history of humanity. These crimes, committed under the guise of scientific research, not only cost thousands of lives but also challenged the limits of our understanding of evil. The survivors who lived to tell their stories have ensured that the world does not forget, and the documents that came to light decades later continue to remind us that science without ethics is not progress, but destruction. V-2 rockets, the missiles that redefined war in open space. The development of the V-2 rockets by Nazi Germany marked a turning point in the history of warfare and technology. These weapons, considered the first long-range ballistic missiles, represented an unprecedented advance in the military field and also laid the foundation for space exploration. However, behind their creation lies a history filled with exploitation, human suffering, and boundless ambition. In the early 1930s, Nazi Germany was already seeking to develop technologies that would give it a strategic advantage over its enemies. Among these innovations, rockets held a prominent place. Under the direction of Wernher von Braun, a young engineer passionate about space exploration, the regime began to invest in research programs to transform rockets from simple scientific experiments into weapons of war. Von Braun, who would later become a key figure at NASA, worked in a secret laboratory in Peenemünde, an island in the Baltic Sea where the V2 project was born. The V2 rocket, officially named Vergeltungswaffe 2, was designed to attack Allied cities from long distances. Powered by a mixture of liquid oxygen and ethanol, it could reach supersonic speeds and carry an explosive payload of nearly 1 ton. In 1944, the V2s began to be launched against targets in London, Antwerp, and other European cities, causing massive destruction and terrorizing civilian populations. However, the development and production of the V2 rockets came at a high human cost. To meet the regime's demand, thousands of prisoners of war and enslaved workers were forced to work under inhuman conditions in the underground Mittelwerk plant, where the rockets were assembled. Testimonies from survivors reveal the atrocities committed in these factories. A former Buchenwald prisoner, transferred to Mittelwerk, described the conditions as a hell of darkness, hunger, and death. According to records, more than 20,000 workers died during the construction and production of the V2s, many from exhaustion, hunger, or summary executions. Declassified files from 1991 revealed the direct complicity of von Braun and other engineers in the exploitation of this slave labor. Although von Braun later claimed that he had no control over the workers' conditions, documents recovered show that he regularly visited Mittelwerk and was aware of the brutal treatment of the prisoners. This duality in his role as a technological visionary and collaborator in war crimes remains a topic of intense historical debate. The V2 rockets represented an impressive technological breakthrough for the time. Unlike conventional bombs, which could be intercepted, these rockets were practically impossible to stop once launched. The attacks on London, which began in September 1944, demonstrated the range of this new weapon. Testimonies from London residents capture the psychological impact of the V2s, which arrived without warning due to their supersonic speed. A survivor, identified as Margaret T., recalled the terror of those days. "We were at home and suddenly everything exploded. There were no sirens, no warnings, just chaos and destruction." Despite their destructive capacity, the V2 rockets did not significantly alter the course of the war. Production was slow and costly, and while they caused thousands of deaths, their strategic impact was limited. However, their importance goes beyond their military effectiveness. The V2 rockets established the basic principles for the design of ballistic missiles and space launchers, marking the beginning of the space age. After Germany's defeat in 1945, the V2 program became a coveted prize for the Allied powers. In Operation Paperclip, the United States relocated von Braun and hundreds of German scientists to its territory, along with materials and plans related to the V2 rockets. This initially secret operation allowed the technological advances developed under the Nazi regime to be used for military and space purposes in the post-war period. One of the most controversial aspects of this knowledge transfer was von Braun's incorporation into NASA, where he played a key role in the development of the Apollo program and the sending of humans to the moon. While his achievements in space exploration are undeniable, his association with the crimes committed during the production of the V2 rockets raises ethical questions that persist to this day. In 1976, shortly before his death, von Braun was interviewed about his role in the war. His response reflects the complexity of his legacy. "I only wanted to build rockets to reach space. I deeply regret what happened, but I didn't have the power to change things." In addition to its impact on science and technology, the V2 rockets also influenced popular culture and the perception of modern warfare. Images of these rockets launching into the sky became symbols of humanity's ability to create and destroy at the same time. In the post-war period, both the United States and the Soviet Union capitalized on the lessons learned from the V-2 program to develop their own intercontinental ballistic missiles, thus consolidating the arms race of the Cold War. Recently declassified documents revealed that the Soviets also used German prisoners to work on their rocket program, a practice that reflects how human exploitation did not end with the fall of the Third Reich. These documents show that although the context was different, technological advances continued to depend on questionable methods. The history of the V-2 rockets is an example of how scientific ambition can be used for both war and progress. Although designed for destruction, the principles behind these rockets led to the creation of technologies that are now used for space exploration. However, the human cost of their development should never be forgotten. The thousands of enslaved workers who lost their lives at Mittelwerk serve as a reminder that even the most revolutionary advances can be stained by human suffering. The V-2 program marked a before and after in the history of military and space technology, demonstrating the power and danger of science when detached from ethics. This chapter of the Third Reich not only defined the future of war and space exploration, but also left a legacy of questions that humanity continues to struggle to answer. Mass control, propaganda, and technology to manipulate the masses. Nazi Germany stood out for its advancements in weaponry and military technology, but one less discussed yet crucial aspect of the regime's power was its ability to control and manipulate the masses. This control, orchestrated with precision and supported by technological innovations, became one of the regime's most powerful tools. Through propaganda, the Nazis shaped public perception, consolidated their power, and dehumanized those they deemed enemies of the state. This ideological machine was not the result of chance, but a meticulous plan that combined traditional techniques with the most advanced technologies of the time. From the early days of the regime, Joseph Goebbels, Minister of Propaganda, understood the potential of mass media as a political weapon. Under his direction, the Reichsministerium für Volksaufklärung und Propaganda, Ministry of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda, was established, an institution dedicated to controlling all aspects of Germany's cultural and media life. Radio, cinema, and the press became the pillars of this strategy, with one clear objective: to create a uniform and omnipresent message that resonated in every corner of the Reich. One of the most iconic elements of this campaign was the Volksempfänger, a radio receiver specifically designed to be affordable and accessible to most Germans. Introduced in 1933, this device played a key role in broadcasting Hitler's speeches and Nazi propaganda. A declassified archive in 1998 revealed that by 1938, over 70% of German households owned one of these receivers, ensuring the regime's message reached millions of people. Hitler's speeches, carefully edited and aired in prime time, sought to foster a sense of unity and absolute loyalty. One listener from the time recalled, "You could feel how Hitler's voice enveloped you. Even if you didn't want to listen, you couldn't escape his influence." Cinema was another crucial tool in Nazi propaganda. Goebbels personally oversaw the production of films that promoted the regime's ideals. Works such as Triumph of the Will by Leni Riefenstahl not only glorified German military power, but also portrayed Hitler as an almost divine figure. These films, viewed by millions across Germany, combined advanced cinematographic techniques with a clear ideological message. A recent discovery in film archives revealed the extensive visual scripts used by Riefenstahl, with precise instructions on camera angles and editing to maximize the emotional impact on viewers. The printed press also fell under the regime's control. Newspapers, under strict state supervision, published news that reinforced the Nazi narrative while censoring anything that could contradict it. Documents found after the war detail how blacklists of journalists and publications considered dangerous to the stability of the Reich were created. The media became a tool for fueling hatred toward Jews, communists, and other minorities. A typical headline from the era described Jews as parasites who threatened the purity of the German nation. Technology also played a central role in surveillance and internal control. The regime developed advanced methods to monitor its citizens, using techniques that foreshadowed modern espionage systems. The Gestapo, the state's secret police, employed recording equipment and listening devices to identify and track dissenters. A declassified file from 1994 showed how these devices were installed in strategic locations, such as cafes and train stations, where groups deemed subversive gathered. These reports detail how the recorded conversations were meticulously analyzed to identify potential threats to the regime. A lesser-known but equally fascinating aspect was the use of technology to manipulate public events. Mass rallies, such as those held in Nuremberg, were not only demonstrations of political power but also carefully choreographed spectacles. Lights, sounds, and speeches were designed to provoke a collective emotional response. An engineer who worked on the lighting systems for these rallies later commented, "The lights were not just decoration, they were part of the message. They created an atmosphere where you felt insignificant but part of something bigger." Although these propaganda and control tools seemed invincible, they also had their limitations. Internal documents from the Ministry of Propaganda, found after the war, reveal that Goebbels expressed concerns about the effectiveness of his strategies in rural areas, where the lack of access to technology made it harder to disseminate the Nazi message. Additionally, reports indicate that some Germans, especially the younger generation, began to question the official narrative toward the end of the war, influenced by foreign radio broadcasts like the BBC. The Nazi propaganda machine was not only effective in Germany, but also influenced abroad. During the early years of the regime, Goebbels promoted films and publications portraying Germany as a modern and peaceful nation, attempting to improve its international image. However, as the war intensified, these campaigns became more aggressive, trying to justify the regime's invasions and atrocities. A British declassified file from 2005 revealed how German diplomats tried to counter international criticism by distributing propaganda materials in occupied countries. The psychological impact of this propaganda was profound and lasting. German citizens were conditioned to accept Nazi ideology as an absolute truth, which facilitated the acceptance of genocidal policies and the militarization of society. However, it also generated resistance. In diaries recovered from the time, there are testimonies of Germans secretly writing about their discontent with the regime and its manipulation. One such diary, belonging to a young student from Hamburg, reads, "They tell us what to think, what to believe, but in my heart I know this is not right. I hope one day we can speak freely." The shadows of science fiction, UFOs, and secret projects. In the final years of World War II, as Nazi Germany faced growing pressure from the Allies on all fronts, reports emerged of highly experimental projects in the military and technological fields. Among them, investigations into unconventional aircraft, similar to what we now know as flying saucers, stand out for their ambition and mystery. Although many of these projects were left unfinished due to the collapse of the Third Reich, documents discovered after the war reveal that the Nazis were exploring advanced aerodynamic technologies years ahead of their time. The development of these aircraft was linked to the regime's obsession with dominating the skies and ensuring its technological supremacy. One of the nerve centers of these investigations was the secret Peenemünde laboratory, primarily known for being the birthplace of the V-2 rockets. However, declassified files in 1989 revealed that scientists at Peenemünde were also working on prototypes of circular aircraft, capable of maneuvering in ways that surpassed the capabilities of conventional aircraft of the time. The most well-known project related to these aircraft was the Schriever Habermohl, named after the German engineers Rudolf Schriever and Klaus Habermohl. According to documents captured by Allied forces in 1945, this project aimed to develop a disc-shaped aircraft equipped with turbines that would allow it to take off and land vertically. Although the design was never completed, the recovered sketches show a vehicle surprisingly similar to modern descriptions of UFOs. A British intelligence report from 1946 described the project as ambitious, but technically plausible. Another intriguing project was called Die Glocke, the bell, a device described in documents recovered in Poland that combined electromagnetic technology with unconventional aerodynamic principles. Although its exact purpose remains a subject of debate, reports suggest that it may have been an attempt to develop an advanced propulsion system. Declassified files from 2010 indicate that Die Glocke was developed at a site known as Der Riese, an underground complex in the Silesian mountains, adding an aura of mystery to its story. Testimonies from engineers who worked on experimental projects under the Third Reich provide a glimpse into the Nazis' ambitions in this field. A former collaborator of Peenemünde, interviewed by U.S. forces in 1946, stated, "We were pushing the limits of what we thought was possible. Some designs were so advanced that they seemed like science fiction, but for us, they were the future of aviation." However, technical limitations and the collapse of the regime prevented these investigations from advancing beyond the early stages. Many of the prototypes were never built, and the few that were constructed were too unstable for sustained flights. For example, a Soviet intelligence report on the Schriever Habermol mentions that the experimental models failed to achieve more than a few meters of altitude before losing control. Despite these limitations, reports on Nazi investigations into unconventional aircraft technologies continued to fuel rumors in the years after the war. Some of these rumors mixed with conspiracy theories suggesting that the Nazis had developed extraterrestrial technology. However, the available historical documents do not support these claims. What is clear is that the regime had a genuine interest in exploring revolutionary aerodynamic designs, driven by a combination of military ambition and scientific curiosity. One of the most revealing findings in this regard was a set of blueprints discovered at an abandoned German military base in Bavaria in 1945. These blueprints showed a design for a circular aircraft with advanced stability and propulsion features. According to experts who analyzed the documents, the design was based on legitimate aerodynamic principles, although it would require technologies that did not exist at the time. The influence of these investigations extended beyond the end of the war. During Operation Paperclip, German scientists who had worked on experimental aircraft projects were brought to the United States, where their knowledge contributed to the development of advanced aviation technologies. One of these scientists, Arthur Rudolph, who later played a key role in the U.S. space program, had participated in research related to unconventional propulsion systems. In the post-war period, both the United States and the Soviet Union began developing technologies based on principles similar to those explored by the Nazis. This led to speculation about how the German findings might have influenced the Cold War arms race. Declassified Soviet files from 2014 revealed that the Soviet Union had recovered prototypes and blueprints of German circular aircraft, which influenced their own research projects. An intriguing curiosity related to these projects is the use of advanced materials in some of the designs. Technical reports mention lightweight and durable alloys being developed for the circular aircraft, many of which would be adopted in the aerospace industry decades later. These materials, along with the experimental aerodynamic principles, highlight how the Nazis sought not only to win the war, but also to redefine the future of aviation. Although much of the research on these aircraft was lost or destroyed during the final days of the Third Reich, the surviving fragments offer a fascinating glimpse into the technological ambitions of a desperate regime. The documents, blueprints, and testimonies available suggest that the Nazis were on the verge of discovering technologies that could have changed the course of the war, although they never overcame the technical and logistical challenges required to implement them. While the designs for flying saucers and devices like Die Glocke never fully materialized, they represent an intriguing chapter in the history of military engineering, where reality came dangerously close to science fiction. Stolen Science, Operation Paperclip, and the Space Race. At the end of World War II in 1945, while Europe lay in ruins, the victorious powers embarked on a new struggle, securing the scientific and technological secrets of the Third Reich. Among the most coveted objectives were the advancements in rocketry, aeronautics, and weaponry developed by the Nazis. This chapter focuses on an operation that would change the course of history, Operation Paperclip, a U.S. program designed to recruit the best German scientists and bring them to the United States before they fell into Soviet hands. The name Paperclip comes from the paperclips that U.S. officials used to mark the files of scientists considered valuable. Among the most notable was Wernher von Braun, the genius behind the V-2 rockets, whose ambition to explore space made him an indispensable asset. Declassified files in 1995 revealed that although many of these scientists had direct ties to Nazi war crimes, their files were deliberately altered to facilitate their transfer and recruitment. Von Braun and his team arrived in the United States in 1945. Initially, they worked on military projects developing ballistic missiles that would play a crucial role in the Cold War. However, the true impact of Operation Paperclip was felt in the space arena. In 1960, von Braun was appointed director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, where he led the development of the Saturn V rocket, the very one that would carry humans to the moon in 1969. Despite these achievements, the legacy of Operation Paperclip is marked by controversy. Documents and testimonies reveal that several of the recruited scientists were actively involved in war crimes, including the use of slave labor in the production of the V-2 rockets. An internal U.S. government report from 1949 admitted that the strategic value of the scientists outweighs the ethical concerns regarding their background. This statement reflects the moral tensions that defined the program. One of the most revealing findings was a series of personal letters from von Braun, discovered in 2004, in which he described his visits to Mittelwerk, the underground factory where thousands of prisoners died during the production of the V-2s. In one of these letters, he wrote, "We cannot ignore the conditions, but our priorities are clear. These rockets must fly." Such statements fuel the debate about the moral responsibility of those involved in Operation Paperclip. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was also conducting its own talent hunt. Under Operation Osoaviakum, the Soviets moved hundreds of German scientists to their labs and factories, including some who had worked on the same projects as von Braun. These efforts contributed to the development of the Soviet space program, which reached its peak with the launch of Sputnik in 1957, the first artificial satellite in orbit. The space race that followed was largely driven by the stolen advancements from the Third Reich. Both the United States and the Soviet Union used the knowledge and technologies developed under the Nazi regime to gain an advantage in this new era of exploration. However, the human and ethical costs of these acquisitions are hard to ignore. Declassified Soviet archives from 2008 reveal that some of the scientists recruited by the Communist bloc also faced retaliation and constant surveillance, considered both valuable assets and potential traitors. The impact of Operation Paperclip extended far beyond space exploration. Intercontinental ballistic missile systems, jet propulsion development, and advances in composite materials are just a few examples of the technologies that emerged from the knowledge acquired from Nazi scientists. However, this progress was accompanied by a legacy of unanswered questions about the ethics of using knowledge obtained through human suffering. One of the most striking testimonies about Operation Paperclip came from an engineer who worked with von Braun in Huntsville, Alabama. In a 1973 interview, he commented, "He was brilliant, yes, but there was something about him that I never fully understood. He knew what had happened in Germany, but he never spoke of it. It was as if he had erased that part of his life." This silence, shared by many of the recruited scientists, adds a layer of complexity to the legacy of the operation. In the years that followed, the use of knowledge from the Nazi regime has led to ongoing debates about the ethical implications of utilizing technologies developed under inhumane conditions. While some argue that these advancements have benefited humanity, others insist that we must never forget the circumstances under which they were created. The scientific and technological legacy of the Third Reich is as fascinating as it is unsettling. Through innovations like the V-2 rockets and experimental projects that propelled space exploration, it was demonstrated how human ambition can reach new horizons even in times of war. However, these advancements were marked by exploitation, dehumanization, and a total disconnect from ethics. Today, the knowledge gained from the Nazi regime continues to influence fields like aviation, rocketry, and space exploration. Yet we must always remember the human cost that it entailed. These advancements cannot be separated from the crimes that made them possible. This dark chapter in the history of science and technology challenges us to reflect on the price of progress and to ensure that we never repeat the mistakes of the past.